What's happening, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to the Crash Bang Boom podcast. Today's guest is someone I met a long time ago in an interesting circumstance and only realized after the fact who he was. And that guy would be drummer Jason Sutter, who presently plays with Cher and has played with everybody from Chris Cornell to Marilyn Manson, Forigner, Smash Mouth, and many more. And who's also done no shortage of studying, gigging, recording, drumming, teaching, and all that goodness. So it's definitely good times talking to him about all of it. And I certainly hope y'all dig the combo. Keep your eyes peeled for Jason at the 2020 Drumhead Music Festival, by the way. Killer lineup on this festival, so definitely psyched that Jason's a part of it. And I'll include some links for all that information. Crash Bang Boom podcast can be found on my iTunes podcast, Stitcher, Luminary, Google Play, Podbean, and Amazon Music podcasts, as well as my SoundCloud and YouTube pages. Feel free to check out any of the previous 200 episodes. Give me a like, maybe check out the Facebook or Instagram, and or give me a subscription or a positive review. That would be the shit. Sponsor shout out to the one and only NewOrleansRecordPress.com. If you're looking to release some vinyl, hit them up to check out all the electroplating, mastering, design, packaging, and vinyl coloring options, amongst a bunch of other NASA-like options that are primarily reserved for physicists. And they got a real-time quote generator to add it all up so you can keep tabs on it. They also print 12 and 7-inch records in 150 and 180 gram variants, and they do small runs of 100 and larger runs up into the thousands. So hit them up, and that's NewOrleansRecordPress.com. Do please support bands in the form of live streams, lessons, tutorials, and master classes from your favorite musicians, and or purchasing merch or physical releases that are for sale, as well as supporting websites like SaveOurStages.com that are looking to provide some assistance to venues that are very much feeling the burn in these tough times. So help out any way you can. So here we go, Jason Sutter. It's been 15 years in New York, and I'm off to Salt Lake City, Utah. Life is strange. Crash Bang Boom.
Crowds go mad with joy.
Yeah! Jason Sutter, what's happening, man? How are you doing, buddy?
I'm great. How are you, man?
I'm hanging in there, man. You and I were speaking a little bit about this earlier. I've got a big move coming up. I haven't been in New York now for 15 years, so I'm trying to compartmentalize my stress as best as possible, given that tomorrow the movers come, and shit is like, on my heels. So it's
it's an interesting time. I feel like a lot of people are. It's like I use that like desperate times as desperate measures. Not that and I don't mean that in like terrible way. I think just a lot of people are making moves, whether that means actually physically moving or just changing your life,
right, in
ways that a lot of people normally wouldn't have probably changed their lives.
Mm-hmm.
I find myself just kind of going out on a limb and doing a lot of different things that I pre-pandemic would never have probably considered doing, but I'm actually happy that I'm making a lot of those moves. So hopefully that will be the same for you. But yeah, at this moment, I'm sure it's stressful as hell. I don't plan on ever moving from the house in LA I'm in ever. So,
really?
Yeah.
How long have you been there?
I've been in this house for 17 years. Yeah.
Wow.
And for 17 years. And, it's very affordable. I live in North Hollywood. It's a beautiful house. I have a big front grass yard that's flat with ficus trees that surround it, so it's kind of private. Wow. And then I have a pool, and a big backyard too. So, I kind of like during pandemic, it's really saved me because I do love this home so much. So I have a park in the front and the beach in the back, basically.
Wow.
So I don't have to leave. Yeah, I really am lucky. And I have a little jazz kit in one of my guest bedrooms, a little old jazz kit, so that's fun to practice, real quiet, work on touch and brushes and stuff. So it's I got everything I need. I've been really lucky.
That's awesome, man. Well, given everything that we're talking about and the environment in which we find ourselves, how have some of what would have been your touring plans been altered? Because I know from looking at your website that it appeared that there were some March shows with Cher, who you've been playing with. So what happened to those? This
was a great year. It was my third year with her, which, in this business, to work with anybody for a year, for 5 months is huge. To work with somebody for 3 years is like, in tour years, that's like 20,
Yeah.
So I'm really proud of that. And really, it just means so much because she's so fantastic. The band that she hired is so fantastic. It's just a wonderful environment. The music is probably the most challenging I've ever had because stylistically you run the gamut from 1969 to dance jams in the 90s to, you know, metal tunes in the 80s. So
right.
I'm put through my paces from, you know, from I Got You Babe to Believe. I play an electronic kit and I play a full like vintage Octaplus Ludwig kit that is, you know, remade to vintage specs. So it's really, it's a lot of work, man. You know, it's a lot of mental and physical. So it's really a fun, great gig. But so anyway, we've done it 3 years. So this would be the third year. We were about a week into 3 shows into a 2-month tour of secondary markets. Mm-hmm. And for dudes who don't know what that means, that's like Boise, Idaho, Billings, Montana. And to be honest, I'd rather play those places than Chicago or New York any day.
Really?
Because they're just so much more interesting, those little towns. I'm fascinated by native culture, so I love like going to Billings, Montana, and being around this Arapaho culture, and you know, so there's like those things are really, it's way more sexy to me to play those out of town little, you know, venues. Or we were in Europe for 2 months last year. We played Leeds, and
Wow.
I've never played Leeds in the UK, so that to me was one of the most fun places to get to play because I played Birmingham and London and, you know, Ireland and, you know, and in that area, and, you know, Manchester. So to me, to get to play a place like Leeds is really exciting to me. To play a city I don't play as often or have never played, that's really what I'm in it for now,
right.
as far as the travel, because I love that part.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, we were in Oklahoma City. I actually high-fived with the great Jimmy Paxton as he was coming back from a Dixie Chicks tour that was canceled. We were flying out, so I got to high-five him in the airport. You know, it was like a couple days before, you know, complete lockdown. But I guess we should feel lucky that we all got home, you know, because, you know, it could have been a lot hairier. So,
sure.
But yeah, it was like a couple days before lockdown. But this was literally like March 12th. We found out and flew home. And I had I was doing a full drum clinic performing with the TCU, Texas Christian University, with Brian West as who I went to North Texas with, who's the head of the department. We had a whole percussion program. I was playing with the percussion ensemble, doing a percussion clinic, then doing a lecture. I had a whole weekend of percussion with them, and that got bagged that same day. And then everything just fell apart, by 8 o'clock, we're flying home and the tour was over. So that was 2 months. We had another 2 months in Vegas, and then we had another 2 months fall run in America doing major markets like New York and Chicago again. So it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And for me, I have to be honest. And, I know a lot of guys, most of the guys I know aren't really inspired to go practice or work on new tunes or even spend any time in their studio if they have one, just because of a lot of those reasons. For me, I feel like I'm at a place in my life where my playing, half my life, when you hear about people saying, record yourself, and you record yourself and you're like, wow, I sound terrible. You eventually, to younger dudes listening, you actually eventually listen and you go, wow, I don't hate this. And then you go, wow, actually, if you're lucky, you go, I like this guy. I like how this guy plays.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm finally at that point. And so I'm ready to play. I've practiced my whole life. Rich Redmond would give me shit even up to a couple of years ago of like, man, you're still practicing every time I see it, man. It's like, and he's right. I'm a practiceaholic from going to from the academic world I came from. And I'm finally at a point where I'm actually feel like I just want to play and I'm there. I'm ready, I'm ready. And there's nothing wrong with being able to say that. We're always students, but I'm ready to play. And I've been doing this for a long time. So it's really a bummer because I was just ready to go and do this again, because these tours, especially with the people that we're playing with and her as an artist and the music I'm playing, I'm such a huge fan of. It's such a high level of professionalism. It's really heartbreaking to have that pulled out from under you. So anyway, so that was what this year was, which is that's a pretty substantial year, and who knows what else we would have had thrown in. I'm just glad that we spent 2 months in Europe last year. I don't know when we're going, you go back to Europe. I don't know when that's going to happen with all this. Yeah. And I spent, we did Australia. We did a full two U.S. tours last year, all arenas sold out. Wow. She's doing her final run. So these shows are events. There's not an empty seat now. So it's, 2 nights sold out at Madison Square Garden, 2 nights sold out at London O2 Arena. It's really exciting. So, and with the group and the band, I can't really say enough about it. So if you're in a gig that sucks right now, and I've had a lot of those, keep going, because you might end up in a gig like this where it's like, it checks all the boxes.
Wow. Gotcha. As far as some of the preparations and rehearsing to nail down the stuff, it sounds like it's, as you mentioned, a diverse set given the duration of her career and whatnot. But just as far as like the technical things, I mean, again, I know you had this giant kit with concert toms, I believe double bass. You had an electronic kit off to your left to be able to navigate any of those voicings that you'd need for maybe the more modern dancey stuff. I'm assuming there's synchronized dance moves going on. Like, I mean, the preparation for that, I imagine it's not just playing, keeping time. There's a lot of variables in there with that gig, I would imagine.
When it first started, I had about 3-4 months allotted to shed that. And luckily, Roland, I use a TD-50. Roland was cool enough to get me a kit to use. I used Simmons drums all through high school. That dates me in the 80s. But I had Simmons. Yeah. I was like early on, cutting edge, playing with a real serious cover band. We had the top of the line gear. So I was playing electronics mixed with like rototoms and getting a real, pro mix live where we could go in any room and kill it.
Right.
And so, but I haven't played electronics since. I've maybe done a few musicals and things with octapads to trigger timpani or chimes, but I haven't really done any electronics. So that was, something I had to get used to, the touch and the feel and just, the logistics of moving back and forth. And many times I'll be playing the kit and then reach over to hit a cross stick or hit an explosion.
Yeah.
So I have to kind of play in between those two. So for Roland to let me use that kit was valuable.
Yeah.
But I was actually doing I got called to do a last minute tour with the great Dee Snider from Twisted Sister.
I wanted to talk to you about him. So tell me about that.
So we're all over Europe. He had a new record, which was cool. And of course we're playing a lot of Twisted Sister.
Yeah.
And that was a great band. And Dee is, one of the most amazing humans you could ever meet. Can't say enough good stuff about Dee as a performer, any human. And while we were out with them, some huge band, on Dee's level, canceled the tour. Like they had a falling out interband. So Dee ended up getting all these dates. And so I found myself, like at one point we went from doing, I don't know, it was going to be like 15 dates to being like 25 or 30 dates. And then we had all these days off in between because most of them are Europe. So at one point, this is going to really eat into my Cher time. And I'm an over preparer. I really want to be prepared. And for something like this, I needed the time. So it was a little hairy because I found myself at one point we were in Sofia, Bulgaria, and played a huge festival there.
Yeah.
At a winery, and then we had 6 days off in Sofia, Bulgaria before we went to France to play the Hellfest, which is a massive festival. So these were, that's how this works. A lot of times logistically, these tour came in at the last minute. So we had to be just kind of like, you guys are, hovering in Sofia, Bulgaria, which is an amazing place to get to hang out. I'm so glad I got to do that, but I'm trying to like learn these tunes with all these tom fills and all these electronics, and you just can't do it. It's not like learning AC/DC. Not that AC/DC is easy, but learning the muscle memory of it is in a hotel room. Right. You can't learn this show in a hotel room with all these tom fills and electronics. So it started to stress me out a little bit, but of course I ended up just having to shed extra when I was back in the U.S. because we kind of came back and forth. But I literally did fly right from like Dusseldorf to Vegas. Wow. So I flew right from a Dee show. It was kind of some Kenny Aronoff shit,
Yeah.
Right from Dee Snider into Vegas, rehearsals the next day. And it was fine, but it was a lot of preparation in the beginning. And then I'll be honest, I still run that show for the last 7 months that we've been off. I run that show once a month just to keep it fresh because it's that much of a bitch.
I bet.
And it's that much of a workout. So, cause it covers the whole gamut. And I mean it with double bass to I Got You, Babe, so.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. So, So anyway, there was a lot of prep, but now we kind of been working so much, but everybody in this band will agree it's a bitch. This show is hairy. It's not a joke. It's not, people think Cher would be easy, but it's, a lot of those tunes were written, they have like 5 bars and, extra 2 bar here, or, a lot of very well composed tunes by these great composers that wrote these hits.
Right. Wow, man. To revert back for a second to Dee Snider, I love it that you played with him, and I'm such a fan of him. And talk about a guy that still to this day sounds incredible with his voice, really maintained it well, is a great performer like he always was. And I mean, I have both Twisted Sisters, Stay Hungry, and You Can't Stop Rock and Roll on vinyl, and I listen to that shit all the time, and I love those records. They're fucking killer.
Yeah, they really have a great feel. They're a great groove, and they're just great. But to be honest, get to tour with them live, to get to go from Dee Snider to Cher and Marilyn Manson to Smash Mouth, and that's the fun of it for me.
Yeah,
that's always been my goal, is to be able to kind of wear a lot of different hats, kind of like a character actor, where you can literally step into that scene and assume that British accent perfectly,
right.
or whatever. It's like, that's my goal, is to play the music where Dee Snider doesn't, turns around and looks at me and is kind of like, have you been playing with us all this time? Because it feels like it. That's
right.
my goal,
Yeah.
And that's what's exciting, and meeting all these different personalities, and then meeting these different dynamics and these different, compositions and styles. So
right.
that's part of the fun of it to me. I've never wanted to play in like just Linkin Park. I wanted to play in a bunch of different projects. That's just, for me, that's my goal. It's like being a Navy SEAL, I joke about that, but I want to be able to kill like 20 ways, instead of one.
I hear you, man. I love the challenge of that. And that's why I'm kind of excited to talk to you about sort of some of these different bands that you've worked with. Another one, which is actually how I met you. I don't know if you remember this or not, but you came through with Chris Cornell, and y'all played, I think, a night or two in New York, and I don't remember where the venue was. I'd never been there. It's the only time that I've ever been to it. It was like West Manhattan. I actually don't remember where it was, but in any case, I used to do a good bit of DJing kind of when I showed up in New York in like 2005, and from like 2005 to, I don't know, those first 6-7 years or so, I was DJing a good bit, and I was DJing in the Lower East Side at this place, Motor City, that is no longer there, and I hung out there all the time, and I actually met you there one night, and you came over to me and you were like, man, this is killer, dude. Like, if I ever get married, I want you to DJ my wedding. And that was actually
awesome.
That interaction that I had with you. And I was like, well, thanks, man. Like, what are you doing here? And you're like, I'm playing this gig with Chris Cornell. I was like, holy shit, man. He's like my favorite singer of all time. Oh my God. And you threw me on the list, and then I got to go see the Chris Cornell show. And
oh, cool.
And you sounded awesome that night.
Thank you. Yeah. And I mean, thrilling, playing New York with anyone is always, the stakes are really high, but luckily playing with Chris, every one of those shows was special. There wasn't a bad one, really. So,
yeah,
it's kind of cool to get to have been a part of that, and great to get to meet so many cool, interesting people throughout those, gigs. So yeah, you were probably playing like real rock and roll, which like no one does.
Totally. Yeah.
So for me, if I hear a DJ playing real rock and roll, I'm like, fuck yeah, I love it,
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, it was wild seeing you playing those songs as well, and again, navigating sort of the differences between both the solo Chris Cornell, Soundgarden, Audio Slave, and all of that stuff, and playing some of that stuff. And I remember you thinking that your drums sounded incredible. If I recall right, it might have been like a red Sparkle Ludwig kit that you were playing. That sounded badass.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was that. Yeah. And to get to play all those styles from, you're literally trying to, you're emulating Brad Wilk, you're emulating, all the dudes on his solo records, you're emulating
Matt Cameron,
you're emulating, all these different styles of from those 3 gigs, his solo records alone, you're literally having to, fall down a rabbit hole of different styles. So, and with Chris, I think by the end we had like, and I'm not exaggerating, I think it was something like 84 tunes that we had to know at any night.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I still have the set list. We would just add them. And from the beginning with Chris, we literally learned 5 songs a week.
Whoa.
Or 4 songs a week, almost always. Even no matter where we were, we'd be in an airport, we'd be like, hey, will you check out, When I'm Down? Okay, cool. And we all, of course, ecstatic because we all love those solo records. So it's like, oh, cool, we get to learn like this tune or that tune or this Audio Slave song or that crazy rare, like, can you learn Gun off the first Soundgarden? It's like, what? So really fun, but stressful. And if an audience, somebody in the crowd, if we had learned it and someone called it out, he would just look at us and go like, yeah, you ready? Okay, here we go.
Wow.
So I had to at least know how to start the song. And then it was a matter of like using my ears and, and staying up on the shit. But I would, every time I got a new song request and we learn it in sound check, he'd always give us plenty of time. Like, hey, can you learn these 3 songs and we'll do them in sound check this week.
Right.
So I literally, every time my tech would write down, I'd put the click of, at least so I know where to start the tune. the tempo. So I could at least in the chaos of how the hell does this go and how many bars. And so I had a set list that he would just update, and it was taped to my floor tom. And when that ended, I think I counted like 84 tunes with all the clicks on them somewhere. So I still have that list somewhere. So yeah, it was kept you on your toes, but it wasn't like if shit went south or got weird, he never, it was like fun.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, how could you screw up that tune we played once, and, Canada when we learned it, and now we're playing it again. So it was always fun. It was never any pressure. And actually, I don't think we really ever screwed anything up. It was just that good of a band.
Yeah.
On it, we were all on it. So it was exciting.
Yeah, man. Well, one thing that I would always said about Chris Cornell was that it's the rare combination of a guy who both had a great voice, was a great performer, was a great singer-songwriter, and a lyricist. And, I mean, quite a handsome-looking dude, too. Shit.
You'd think you had your shit together, and you show up and you'd be like, check out, I got a new jacket, got my haircut. And you walk into the dressing room and be like, yeah, fuck it. I'd be like, yeah, I'm never going to come close to that dude. Just like, it was definitely a lesson in humility, being around it. But he's also was the sweetest dude you could ever meet, incredibly intelligent, like knew way more than you could, like knew shit, like, you'd bring up any topic, like the Romans, and he'd know the whole story, or you could, anything random of history. We'd show up in some city and he'd bring up something about, oh yeah, this is it was like, how the hell do you know this shit, dude?
Right.
You pretty much like went to rock college, how did you get this education? But
yeah.
And he was also a rascal. He was really fun to, he could get into, fun to like get in trouble with, and not bad trouble, but he was like a prankster in like trouble, in a good way. You could see how back in the day when he was probably throwing down with the partying, he could have been a terror,
Right.
But just so fun, the coolest, sweetest, nicest, raddest dude. And I would say, he's one of those guys who's very, very, if you've met Chris Cornell in a meet and greet, you probably didn't really meet him. It takes a while to peel those layers back and be in his world to really know what he's like.
Yeah.
I was just stoked to be able to be in his circle, and in his world, because he is so, just as a human, he's kind of guarded. And I think for people who meet him at meet and greets, I would see one Chris, and then Chris we got to see was a very different one.
Right.
And like my current boss, like I compare the two of them, their voices are so unique. No one will ever sound like either of them. And when you hear it, you'll know it right away. And when you have, custom-made, beautiful in-ears in your ears that are like channeling that voice right to your brain, it's like a drug. And when I come off the road from it, I'd need to hear more Cornell after a few days. After a few days to kind of like level out, because the lion roaring.
Right.
Only one thing sounds like a fucking lion,
Yeah.
That's like, it's hard to describe to younger players or younger musicians, but that's the payoff. All those times, that's where you're like on stage going, yeah, this is all worth it, man.
Right. I hear you, man. My God. In learning some of Matt Cameron's parts, he's another guy that was super interesting and a crucial component to the sort of just the unique aspect of what Soundgarden ultimately was. And I think his ability to play odd time signatures and keep it really even to the extent that I don't think most people would have thought about it as being odd. And I think he was one of those guys that really did that. So I imagine it must have been pretty cool kind of getting inside of his playing as well for some of those songs, huh?
It was insane. And talking about preparation for that gig, which was under the gun, I got called and, can you come in and do this audition tomorrow? He's heard of, everybody I got in LA, and he wants to hear, I'm not finding the guy, the agent, and so I have to learn all these tunes, and I'm calling guys who audition. How I've got like no time to do this. How did you count the section for, Spoon Man during those breaks? And,
right.
And they're like, I just counted 5. And I'm like, I hear like 5.5.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's like a long 5. It's like a 5. So I was like, fuck it. And so I just did that. And when we finished, he responded to that section and said, that's the first time that sounded right since Matt.
Interesting.
And it was like, okay, good. So yeah, every little inch of that Chris hears and feels, because when you're singing, and this is another thing for young players or anybody really, when you're playing with someone who's singing on that level, moving that much air at that volume, at that range, every tempo is essential.
Yeah.
he really appreciated those tempos being, or those breaks were so important. And I'm sure someone like Matt, obviously, who's an amazing songwriter and musician, and of course, was such an integral part of that band or any band he plays. And he's an incredible human and musician as well. So we could do a whole interview on how great Matt Cameron is. But because of that, so I think that's what Chris was waiting for, and that's why it clicked, and I was really pleased to be able to be like, you're the dude. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. When I learned about like helping them sing, your tempo is not just about keeping the time for the band, it's for their voice. Right. And when you're dealing with these really high octane singers, it's that a few this way or that way, or pushing or pulling in the right spot makes all the world of difference for their performance. And really, that's in many cases why half the people are there, So
wow,
it's big.
Man. Yeah.
Our job is bigger than you think,
Yeah. No, that's a good distinction. Well, let me ask you another interesting, wild, I would say wilder, obviously, frontman. Your time with Marilyn Manson. How did you get that gig? And tell me maybe some of the, just one of the more interesting stories that could have, or even strange gigs or anything. I've heard so many bizarro stories.
Yeah, it was, people always say like I played with Joe Perry and somebody says like, dude, how'd you get that gig? And it's like, I don't think you have the time to hear how long that has been in the making. You know what I mean? Of me playing with Joe Perry. It's like, that's been like 20 years in the making of like meeting this guy backstage who knew that guy who introduced me to, I mean, it's like that weird. Like a lot of people don't realize like these gigs just, so they germinate and you have to plant a seed at certain times, and you have to put things out there as a young player. Definitely say like, if you want a gig, I would say to students, like, imagine the gigs you want. Not just the style, not just, I want to be a session drummer. I want to be a rock drum,
Yeah.
No, who do you want to play with? What do you want to play? And if you're not, winning the lottery with Linkin Park or some band that's like, that, which is probably not going to happen, you're going to be a sideman. And the sooner you figure out who you want to play with, the sooner you can move in that direction,
mm-hmm.
And I am a firm believer of that because I can actually say my resume is literally all the bands I've ever wanted to play with.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I went right for those bands and I played with those bands. I didn't just, so there is something to that. I think, literally setting your destiny and saying, I want to play with this guy or I want to play with that band.
Right.
If you don't know what you want to do, it's going to be a lot harder to do it. I've always respected Manson. I read his book. I read every biography, whether I like the band or not. I'm fascinated by the music biographies. And so I'd read his book long, even in the 90s. And I always thought he was great. And I thought, it would be a cool gig to do. And as I'm playing more with Cornell and in these different circles, I'm running into different people who either worked with him or had worked with him or were going to, go back to working with him.
Mm-hmm.
So I was on tour with, I think the seed was planted with, I was on tour with Cornell,
mm-hmm.
and we had toured with a bunch of different bands. And one of the bands was a band called Ashes Divide, which was Billy Howard, plays with Perfect Circle now.
Mm-hmm.
And the bass player was a guy named Andy Gerald on that gig. And actually, he was playing guitar, I think. Anyway, I see Manson. We're playing a huge festival with Cornell, and Manson's on the stage. It was, at his worst, just can barely stand up, high, can barely make it through the set. It was awful, but it was amazing to see still, which is the beauty of Manson. It's like a spectacle, and nobody does it better than him.
Right.
So, but I'm seeing Andy, and afterwards it's his birthday. We're partying after the show, and I said, "Hey, dude, that's so killer, that gig. I would love to do that gig someday." But of course, Ginger was on the gig, and Twiggy was still in the band.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, "Hey, if that ever opened up and you have a connection, let me know."
Yeah.
Just say it once, say it, and I said it, and I ended up getting the gig with Forigner. Kind of jumping back a little bit.
Yeah.
I ended up getting the gig with Forigner, and the girl who was the head of production for the summer tour, which was Forigner Sticks Kansas, was hip and younger, and she actually was production for Manson, and she was going to go back to Manson when Manson was taking like 4 years off, which he can tend to do, and then do another record and another couple of years of touring. So I said to her, I said, "Hey, babe, like, if that gig ever opened up, and she was kind of like, that's a real tight-knit camp, but, keep you in mind.
Right.
Just keep me in mind, and I think I'd said it once or twice to her. Anyway, long story short, sitting on my couch, I had just finished touring with the New York Dolls, which is amazing, and I just finished Forigner, New York Dolls, and I get a call from Andy Gerald. I'm on my couch like the day after Christmas, and he calls me and he says, "Dude, Manson needs a drummer. He just fired his dude. Are you ready to do this, man? And I was like, hell yeah, let's do it. And of course, I get a call from Andy Gerald, and he says, hey dude, this gig's open. Are you ready? And then I get a call from Tracy, and I call Tracy, and she says, dude, I've already put in a call to the manager. You've already got your foot in the door,
Wow.
So it's just amazing how those little seeds all of a sudden kind of came out of nowhere. And this is like 2 days after Christmas, about, 3 days before New Year's Eve. You don't get a gig around that time of the year. You just normally don't.
Yeah.
So it was pretty amazing to get to be. So I got a call from that camp, and they basically said, hey, you want to, get together and, we'll see if we can get you together with Manson. I get called at the last minute. I learn all the tunes to the live shit, which you want to do. You want to learn the live stuff because you want, that they're about to go out on the road. You want to know the live stuff. Well, I got a call from the manager. He says, he'll see you today. He'd been talking to me on and off for about a week. And he said, hey, Manson will see you today. Twiggy will be there. Tony, his manager. Learn these 5 songs. And I want you to be able to play. We're all set up for production. Bring your drums and your cymbals. I literally didn't tear my shit down. No cases. Hardware thrown in, just fold the basses, throw the cymbals in a bag. Like I had no time.
Yeah.
And it turns out, he says, you have to learn 6 tunes. They're in full production because they just canned this drummer while they're like going through all this shit. And he said, you got to play to a iPod. And I'm like, okay, I just learned all the live YouTube shit.
Right.
And they're totally different versions. They're shorter, they're longer.
Yeah.
So now I have to frantically run in my studio, learn the right versions, race down, man, get dressed. Like, what am I going to wear? And then race over there and set up my drums and be ready to meet this dude. Because there's like 2 other drummers in the wings, and one of them had auditioned once before. Manson liked him, and he said, because he was leaving for the holidays. He said when he's back, right after Christmas, he's coming back into LA. I'm going to hear him one more time. So I knew I had to kill this shit. I knew there was a dude, with a foot in the door. So anyway, long story short is I'm hanging out there. Twiggy comes in and is actually really sweet and nice and says like, hey dude, nice to meet you. Are you ready for this? I'm like, I don't know. Am I ready for this? What the fuck am I doing? And so I'm hanging out, and in walks Manson. He's got a cheeseburger in one hand and a glass of absinthe in his other. And amazingly, dude, and this is definitely a lesson for, I think, young players and musicians, you never know how you're going to appeal to who you're auditioning for. There are many ways to take them. It's not just you're playing. It's, you walk in the door and you're already auditioning.
Right.
They're looking at you going yes or no. You're already, So anyway, Manson walks in, and it turns out, thanks to YouTube, so I do this thing. It's online. It's called, I forget, ABC, or it's called Rudimental. And a buddy had filmed that for me. I was working on a rudimental snare solo I had written. I was going to perform in drum clinics, set myself apart, do something unusual for clinics, and, talk about the importance of rudiments, bada bing, bada boom. Anyway, so while he's hanging out, he's a big fan of TV and YouTube and all that shit, and he's hanging with the bass player, Fred, who's great. And he says, who is this guy anyway? He's like, oh, he's great. He does all this kind of shit. So he showed him like a Bonzo Bash video of me playing with like a Zeppelin tribute thing at this Bonzo Bash.
Yeah.
He showed him this snare drum thing. And Manson was really into it with Fred. And he said, dude, this guy's great. Holy shit. So when I walk in, my icebreaker with Marilyn Manson is a rudimental snare drum solo. And he sees me and he's like, hey, what's up, Mr. Magic Hands? He's like, seriously, dude, I was really blown away by your snare drum solo, man. That kind of broke the ice with him, So, I'm auditioning. I'm playing through the tunes. I'm playing through an iPod, and I'm playing these songs. So they're blasting out, and I'm playing along with them. And, Manson's all tracks anyway. So when you're playing Beautiful People, there are tracks going, and you're playing over those tracks. And they pull a lot of the stuff out for younger drummers who don't know how that works. Anyway, that's a whole other lecture of playing the tracks. But as it starts, he's sitting up there. We do the first tune. Second tune, he's kind of standing up, kind of rocking out, getting into it. Third tune, I look, I'm rocking out, there's spotlights on me because I'm in a rehearsal studio. Third tune, he's standing over me, rocking out. And fourth tune, he cuts it off and says, all right, dudes, pick up your gear. Let's start playing. And I figure if an artist, reacts that way, that's a good sign, because as a good musician, you want to make whoever's in the room start picking up their instrument, want to pick up their instrument and play. So I knew that was a good sign. And afterwards, Manson wanted me to go by his house and hear the new record, which was about to be in the can.
Yeah.
So that was my audition, how that went. And obviously I got the job, you know.
Right.
Luckily, I had been playing a lot of double bass, and there's a song on this record, which is called Born Villain, called Murderers Are Getting Prettier Every Day. You should check it out. But it's a double bass tune where it starts right out of the gates, double bass, and up till the bridge where it goes to halftime, and then it goes right back to double bass. It's a bitch. And luckily, I had been shedding double bass right since the Cornell gig had ended, and I had a little time to practice. When he played me that song at his house that night, because Chris Verena from Nine Inch Nails had programmed those drums. They sound like real drums. It's great.
Yeah.
And he played it for me. He said, don't worry, man. You don't have to play that double bass pattern. Chris said he wouldn't be able to when he was going to do the gig for a while. He said he wouldn't be able to either. So we'll just program that double bass thing in. Right. And I remember thinking, he's like, I don't want your legs to get tired so you can't chase chicks after the gig. That's Manson. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm playing that.
Right.
I'm going to play that shit. And literally, I drove home from his house at like 2 a.m. and went right to my studio and played that beat while I had it in my head and started shedding it, you know? Yeah. And then luckily got the call a couple days later after he heard that other dude came back and I got the job. So, wow. And I did play that beat and you can check it out online. I think if you look up Serbia, Marilyn Manson, Murderers Are Getting Prettier Every Day, you can see that. And there are no tracks on that shit, you know, which it's not that crazy double bass, but it was definitely at the time for me. Had I not been shedding double bass, there's no way I would have been able to fool these guys, you know?
Right.
And we're on tour, mind you, with like, we're going on like, you know, after Mastodon, before Slayer. Wow. You know, like, oh yeah, and then it's like, you know, Hell Yeah. And, you know, we're doing, I mean, it was a lesson in double bass. Joey Jordison was still with Slipknot, and we're on tour with those guys every other show on these festivals. So I'm literally like hanging with Vinnie Paul, Jason Bittner, Dave Lombardo. So I got to play, you know, there's a lot more double bass than you think in this shit, but also it was just great for me as a drummer to watch these guys and really learn that art form. Right. And I feel like I'm a much better double bass player because of it, you know? So yeah, that was that. As far as like, I mean, every gig was a shit show, you know. One thing I will say is, the manager told me, he said, if Manson screws up, he's going to immediately turn around and look at you and blame you for screwing up. Right. So, because you're a sitting duck. Yeah. You got to be cool with that. Are you going to be cool with that? And I know other drummers who've come since who kind of had a little machismo and couldn't handle that when he turns around and says like, you fucking moron, and makes a big deal out of it because that's what he does so that he doesn't look like he fucked up. Yeah. Right. So you got to get used to that. And that's tough. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like when you spend your whole life like shedding and getting great. And then this dude screws up and then he's roasting you in front of everybody. You got to play it. You trust me the whole way through. You got to like after the show be like, hey, sorry, I screwed that up. Yeah, don't do it again, man. You know, okay, won't do it again. Okay. And then he fucks up that same part the next night, and then you get it again. And my God. So yeah, for those of you drummers who are, you know, get ready for that. But my goal with that gig, just to sum it up, was stay on the bull. Don't let him buck you off. Don't let him knock you off that horse. Stay on the fucking bull. And to be honest, that was such a, you know, when that gig ended, I was really proud that because people get fired left and right in that camp. Yeah, I bet. Jesus. So yeah, so it was harrowing. People are like, is he really insane in real life? It's like, you have no idea. That said, I love the dude. And I saw him recently at a charity event. And it was great to hang. He's an incredible musician. He's an incredible singer. He's an artist. Yeah. I'm so fortunate to be able to get to play with someone of that, you know, that legendary status. The music was so fun to play. The style, like at that time in my life, which was now like 7 years ago, it was really fun to go to these metal festivals all over the world and just get loud and crazy and nuts. And honestly, I wouldn't want to do that now. I'm over that. But I got to do it, you know, check that box, you know, and now I'm doing what I want to be doing with this boss right now, like another legend who I want to play with. And that's a different style of, you know, finesse and technique that's required. But his gig was a whole other thing. And there were samples. There was obviously lots of tracks. So that's a whole nother art form. And so it was just, it was just an incredible, fantastic experience, but a living nightmare too, So I don't know how else to describe it. And we could pick any one of these artists and do a whole entire lecture on it.
I know. I hear you. With the Forigner gig, I love 70s rock. I have so many of those records. I'm born in 76, and I swear it's like somewhere between like 71 and 78. I feel like the 2/3 of my record collection is from that time span. But that brings me, I guess, to like the Forigner gig that you played on, and just some of the other drummers that have had that gig as well, between like Brian Tichy and even Jason Bonham, John Bonham's son. I feel like you all, especially when I saw you with Chris Cornell, you had a good bit of John Bonham-esque kind of tuning, already doing like the Ludwig thing. Did you fall right into that Forigner gig, and was it just like, yeah, this is what I grew up on?
Absolutely. I got the gig from Brian Tichy. If aliens came to Earth and said, give us your best rock drummer and we'll battle you, it'd be like, I'll call Brian Tichy right now.
Yeah.
He's that good. If you don't know who he is, check him out. So he had recommended me. So when I went to play with them, he was on the gig and I auditioned at a sound check, which happens pretty often.
Right.
That's one of those gigs where you have to, really be able to read that room. And that comes from playing a lot with a lot of great players. And these guys are like, no joke. With Forigner, these guys are really serious. And the band is like Jeff Pilson from Dokken on bass, who's one of the fiercest musicians you'll ever be in a room with, and nicest guys. So it's about reading the room. When I had that audition, I realized that the playing was easy. It's feel. It's all feel. Because those drums, even those tracks were produced by by these great producers. The drumming, Dennis Elliott, the original drummer, was fantastic, has a certain swagger and looseness, and a verse will move and push and pull back when, you didn't need a click. So that was one of those real subtle, nuanced gigs. And as far as, and then once, so I was able to like figure out Jeff is the guy you follow. He's a traffic cop. Stay with him. He's with Mick. You're good.
Right.
So yeah. So that's another thing, the more you play with people, the better your feel, and the quicker you're able to adapt to a feel. Mm-hmm. And that can take literally, like, you may have 2 bars. You know what I mean? That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
So that's this band. That's Forigner. They were perfect to the point where I brought in like 4 kits for them to hear before we did the tour, and they picked the kit very definitively. But they were very careful about which one, why. And then the snare drum was key. And they picked one snare drum. And I swear twice in the 2 years I played with them, I tried to like put another snare drum up, and a sound check, somebody heard it and said, wait, that's a different snare drum.
Right.
So these dudes are not messing around.
Was
you know what I mean?
Was it a Superphonic? Was it a Superphonic that?
No. It was, I was using, they liked the most, it was a Rondonet shell titanium Chief, which is a Ludwig. So it's a Superphonic shell, but it's a titanium. So it's a little warmer, a little darker. Sounds great. If you want to check it out, I'm not selling it, but if you go on iTunes, it's live at the iTunes Festival, Forigner live at the iTunes Festival 2010. And it's the snare drum steals the show. It sounds so good, whoever mixed it. But anyway, you can hear the drum sound, the vibe. I'm really proud of that because it's all the hits, and I get to be on that forever. It's like, here's my, here's me playing with one of my favorite bands ever from high school,
totally.
Playing all the hits. So the drums were all Ludwig classics, and they had a tech who tuned them. So that was one of those few gigs where I showed up and it was like, this is how we're tuning the drums. Cool.
Wow.
All right. Yeah. You use Emperors? No, we use Ambassadors. We'll just change them every night. Okay.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. That's how that worked. I never tuned a drum. I never touched shit. If they wanted to muffle something, they muffled it. But they didn't. They left it open, but it was like tuned much lower than I was used to, but still tonal. And the drum sound is great. You can hear it on that recording if you want.
Yeah.
But it was that. Literally, we prefer Ambassadors, and we'll just change them every night. Okay,
wow.
Great.
That's wild. Yeah. Damn.
Yeah. So that's how that goes. And that's another thing where it's like, I'm cool with that. I don't need to be me on a gig.
Yeah.
My personality will come through, but I'm fine with, unlike other cats, like say Kenny Aronoff, you're getting Kenny Aronoff's drum set, his drum sound, and not that he can't change for the gig, but you're getting Kenny Aronoff, you know? I'm going to try to just give you a little bit of Dennis Elliott. I'm going to give you definitely some Brian Tichy, who was just on the gig.
Yeah.
Because he's fresh, and it's not that they didn't like Brian. Brian had to go do something else. He split. So I want to keep them comfortable. So there's a little bit of, I want to give them a little of everything. And my personality will come through just because of, I'm me,
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So I don't mind. Again, I'm the character actor. What does the director want? He wants ambassadors. You got it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You got it. So that's how that gig was.
Wow. That's wild, man.
And super fun too, to get to play with those guys. And, it's just insane. I'll still listen to that iTunes recording every now and then. It just like blows my mind.
That's awesome.
Like, I can't believe I'm on Jukebox Hero or,
right.
playing this live and, with Mick Jones and the whole band. And, at kind of a peak of their kind of killing it,
Right. Have you been revisiting any of your own gear that you've been digging over the past few months?
It's funny that you mentioned that. Yes, I'm revisiting it in the way that I've sold everything. The drums I have, which are Ludwig, I'm a big new Ludwig fan. I don't care about any vintage shit. I don't care about vintage Black Beauties. I've had all of it.
Yeah.
And I really firmly believe, and this is an ad, that new Ludwig stuff is just better. Right. I don't care. You can talk as much as you want about how old the wood was and all that. But when it comes down to it, I'm renting gigs and all over the world from Smash Mouth to Cher and if I get a new rental kit, whether it's a classic, a legacy, a mahogany, I am in heaven. I can tune those drums and they'll sound incredible. If it's an old vintage, hey, we got to this cool 60s kit, I'm like, fuck. It's going to be a nightmare, trying to, because every one of those kits is different.
Absolutely.
If you get a great one and you have it in the studio, that's one thing. But I'm on the road. I'm going to battle here. You know what I mean? I got to make sure that my sword and shield are forged and ready to go. I can't be dealing with something that's not going to be true. So to me, I love vintage gear, but so I got rid of everything I don't need, and so I'm down to the newer Black Beauties, some copper phonics. I've kept most of my drums, but I don't have to keep my drum sets for nostalgia. I know some guys have I have no interest in that, although I do have some very precious kits that are one-of-a-kind Ludwigs or the Donette, a titanium or a stainless steel kit he made me for Manson. That's like a gunmetal, just cool shit that Ron made for me. That's like there's one in the world and stuff like that. I have a few Keplingers. Greg Keplinger is a dear friend. Yeah. But I've since been designed and built a snare drum that's like similar to a Tama Bell brass that Ludwig has been checking out, that I would love to be a drum that they hopefully someday put out. Nice. But that's what I've mostly been playing exclusively. And it's just like once you find your jam, I don't need 4 Superphonics. Yeah. And I don't need any wood drums. I don't play wood drums.
I don't either.
I remember telling I remember telling a kid once, he was like, I just got to get my wood drum together. He's like 24. I'm like, I'm going to let you in on a secret. You don't need a wood drum. You don't need one. It's called a Black Beauty or a Copperphonic. You will never need a wood drum in your entire career. Yeah. You know what I mean?
I know.
You may be the guy who only plays wood drums, and that may be your sound. But I'm just saying, you don't actually need one. Yeah. I can just tell you, So anyway, the point is instead of cleaning my closets, I just decided to sell everything. And it felt great. Yeah. And I still have, to those listening, I still have like 10 kits and I still have like 20 snare drums, but I had like 3 times that much before,
Wow. Really?
Oh yeah.
Wow. That's crazy, man. All that stuff was just stuffed between your house and your studio?
You bet. Just stashed. I mean, I had like 9 Greg Keplinger snare drums, and for me, it was like every time I come through Seattle, I'd say, what do you got, Greg? Bring it out. I'll buy it. Because I wanted to help support Greg because he was still kind of getting the word out there. Mm-hmm. This is in the last, over 20 years, Right. And now everybody knows who Keplinger is. It's awesome. But that was part of it. Trying to buy cool gear. I'm an antique collector. Uh-huh. I collect furniture. I collect leather jackets from the 50s and 60s. I'm a collector. My dad was too. I have a whole video arcade in my home. I'm looking at a Centipede and Donkey Kong working in my kitchen.
Right.
You're moving your family. I'm moving this gear that it's time.
Right.
It's time to make a change. I don't need this around here now. I can clean up my house and have room. I don't need drums in my life. You know what I mean? All over the place because they're such a part of it. I don't need to have stacks of gear. There was a time where I had like 80 snare drums. I have more fun now with like other stuff, like, vintage furniture or homes.
Yeah.
Or, jukeboxes, or shit like that is more fun to me than, which Black Beauty you have, or I'm good. I have just what I need. And so it's that really, when I revisited it, it meant putting it off and selling everything. And luckily during this whole thing, everybody couldn't wait to buy everything. It was amazing.
Right.
That stuff sold in like 2 months. I sold everything.
That's awesome. Damn. Well, with as far as you even finding the drums in the first place, did you come from a musical family, or was anyone in your family a drummer, or did you just find it a different route?
My dad is a sculptor and and taught drawing and sculpture at a university, and also showed a lot in New York. Some of his best friends are the biggest artists in the world, and that he went to college with. And he always wanted to be a drummer. His dad was the chief of police in Milwaukee. And then my uncle became the chief, his brother. So his dad wouldn't allow music. Even though dad always wanted to play drums, it was like, no way. And then when my dad got a scholarship, it was like, okay, well, if that's going to pay for your school, okay, you can be an artist.
Right.
You don't have to be a cop.
Yeah.
So my dad, deep inside, always wanted to be a drummer. And so when I stressed interest, amazingly, the college he was teaching at, Potsdam State in Potsdam, New York, upstate, the professor there they have a huge music program called Crane School of Music, one of the best in all of New York. The professor there is Jim Peterzak, who is one of the best drum teachers in history, and was very highly, huge in the development of the Percussive Art Society. He was in the first percussion ensemble ever, in the Manhattan School of Music in the 50s, performing ionization. Yeah. So like, with the composers and, so to have him be one of my dad's buddies, he said he was an art enthusiast. He said, if I'll trade you drum lessons for your kids for, a painting that you could make for me. And so he did. And so,
nice.
Yeah, it's kind of a bizarre artistic transaction. And so luckily for me, I got by the time I was about 8, I was taking lessons with Peterzak, who went on to teach Dave Weckl and Vinnie Colaiuta.
Right.
So when they were, in their, Dave when he was very young, and Vinny when he was kind of trying to work on his hands in the 80s. So Peterzak is like no joke, and a whole slew of other amazing musicians and people in the industry. And he's still going, he's like mid 70s. He's still like holding court at PASIC. He's a legend.
Wow.
So I'm really fortunate because his hands and the way he works with his hands, his technique is just immaculate. So I had no idea as a little baby I was being like, really finding out like this is how it's done, so I had a little bit of an advantage. And also being in a small town, I was able to gig like crazy because there were colleges everywhere. And there were drummers in this music school, but all my friends, I had a garage band back when people had garage bands, when we were young. We just wanted to play music, and all the kids were professors' kids, and they were all either my age or give or take a few years older than me. So I lived in one town, they lived in another town. They would get school dance gigs, and I would get school dance gigs at my dance. So we were working all in this, throughout this little area of like 5, 6 different little counties.
Yeah.
We were killing it. And I was, I played my first bar gig. I was 13, and my dad had to walk us in and be there. And I was making money when I was like 10.
That's wild.
In this little town. And then that, then it was a Music Theater North, this whole summer program of playing like Little Shop of Horrors and reading charts, and it's like doing that stuff.
Right.
When I'm in junior high, I'm playing like in 3 different bands or 4 different bands. In high school, I'm playing in like 5 bands. One's a cover band, one's a pop band, one's a college band, one's a bar band, one's a high school band. I was literally, by the time I got to college, I had so much playing experience, mostly in pop, rock, blues. So I was ready to like just go full on, music school. I didn't play a rock gig hardly at all, whereas other dudes were finally just getting to play drums with other people. It was like, shit, I did that for the last 9 years,
Right.
And so I had that under my belt, luckily, going into music school. Then it was like, oh shit. And I studied timpani and marimba a little bit in the basics. I had the rudiments down, but I was not remotely prepared for what I was in for.
Yeah, I bet. That's wild. Yeah, because then at some point you end up doing university in North Texas, and whenever I hear that, I always think of guys like Matt Chamberlain and Keith Carlock, and
they were there. When I got in as a freshman, Matt Chamberlain had been there for 2 years.
Wow.
You know, Keith Carlock came a year later.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty amazing. Like Matt Chamberlain, Keith Carlock are literally revolving around my freshman year. You know, one was already there for a couple of years, one was on their way in. Pretty amazing time to be there, I have to say. It was really special, you know.
Right. Absolutely. Is there a shared teacher amongst the three of you?
For sure, Ed Soph, you know,
Gotcha.
the great Ed Soph. Yeah, Ed Soph beyond. I mean, mentally, physically, musically, yeah, I just lucked out going from Peter Zach to Ed Soph, and I could go on and on, you know, but like I've been so lucky to have these amazing, pure, you know, genius musicians and humans, you know, who are all still around, and they influenced all of us. I think, I'm sure everybody will tell you, you know, these guys, they changed the game, you know, for no matter which direction we went. Carlock to Chamberlain, to me, to Jim Riley, to, you know, we just go through all these lists of dudes. So it was very, very fortunate, you know, to go to that school. And that was a whole different kind of discipline.
Yeah.
To thrust into, I guess, you know.
Of course. And then I guess you did University of Miami and ended up getting a graduate's degree in orchestral percussion?
Correct. Yeah, which is crazy. You know, that just happened. And I luckily did all my coursework the first year. The second year, it's a 2-year degree. I taught the drum line both years there. You know, I got paid. I was an assistantship, so I taught all the percussion ensembles. I taught the entire Hurricane drum line 2 years, which is serious college, you know, bowl game. These guys are not messing around.
Totally.
But then also, you know, got to play in the top big band, got to play in all the top ensembles. And then I was playing timpani in the wind ensemble. I was playing in the orchestra. When I was in Miami, I was just going full on legit and jazz. And I ended up getting a gig with this girl, Juliana Hatfield. So I left my final semester, which was all I had left was a recital, classical recital. And I got the gig with Juliana, flew up, auditioned, got hired, and left, and kind of got the blessing of the head of the department and said, you know, you better come back and get that degree or we'll hunt you down, you know, joking. But
yeah.
So yeah, it was amazing. I ended up going to Boston, and next thing you know, I'm playing in England and playing, you know, all these huge, you know, promo shows and playing, you know, I was like out of the frying pan into the fire, right out of grad school, from like timpani mallets in my hand and teaching drumline shit to like playing rock gigs all over, you know, Europe and opening for Jeff Buckley with Juliana Hatfield in 1995. And, you know, it's crazy shit.
That's crazy. So you got to see Jeff Buckley live, man. Holy moly.
Oh, I saw him live a bunch. The tour I was supposed to go on ended up kind of caving in, which a lot of things did back then. But I would see Jeff all the time. Or I would be in like, you know, the Middle East in Boston, famous upstairs, you know, famous club. And there'd be Jeff just hanging out in Boston. Or I'd be in New York at the Time Cafe, and there'd be Jeff Buckley having soup by himself, reading the paper or reading the Village Voice. Like, it's heavy, you know, running into that dude or walking by him on the street. You know, all that record grace is all over the places.
Oh,
and
man.
Shanae, going to Shanae and getting a coffee while he's doing those Shanae concerts. You know, just crazy shit. You know, magical time.
Yeah, man. Props to both Jeff Buckley, of course, and as well Matt Johnson, the drummer on that record, Grace. Man, killer playing.
That whole record.
Yeah, yeah.
It was a great time. You know, that was an exciting time. I literally burst right out of college into like Juliana Hatfield, who's like this critic darling. She's all over the place at the time, and all these great bands. It's like, welcome to the final frontier of like, you know, rock's final stand of the grunge era and 90s. You know,
totally.
These bands from Soundgarden, you know, I got there and Soundgarden put up Super Unknown. And,
right.
You know, when I got to Boston, and Stone Temple Pilots had put out like Purple, and you could just go on and on. You know, all these other bands, like a new band called Space Hog or Sponge, who now are kind of like maybe lost in the periphery, but at the time it was like college radio was just alive. It was that post-Nirvana gold rush.
Of course.
And every band was signed, and you could tour and gig, and people were buying records and CDs like hand over fist. You know, it was really a great time to be jumping into that world. So
yeah,
it was exciting.
Well, when you one last question about seeing Jeff Buckley live, because you're one of the few people that I've even talked to or know of that actually got to see him when he was out and doing it. Would you, in seeing him live, you must have had a sense that he was clearly quite special.
I think anybody who heard that record did.
Yeah.
But that said, you got to remember that record he was a rock star, but it was everybody was a rock star back then. You know, everybody could sell a record. It was like, kind of, I hate to say it, like a poodle rock band in like 1988. You could be the shittiest metal band and you'd get a tour of Japan if you had a record.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
you had a label. Not to negative Jeff, but to be fair, that record was kind of a failure.
Right.
It really wasn't a hit.
Yeah.
It wasn't a hit record. They were like, oh, the second one's going to really push him over the edge. So you got to remember, even though now he's a legend, then he was just another one of these. It was literally Dave Grohl was coming out with his new band called the Foo Fighters, which people thought was kind of a joke.
Yeah.
That's what's happening then. You know what I mean? So you got to remember, like, the pure amount of, like, talent and records and shit that was happening. You know, it's tough for even a record like Grace to kind of cut through all that because it was just, like, so many huge bands. Hole puts out their record and, you know, it's like just – it was incredible, all these, you know, records that were coming out. So, yeah, you knew it right away. I think when I first heard Grace, you could go, like, holy shit. Yeah. But just being around him, he was amazing. He was just a really cool – you know, he was just a presence, you know what I mean? Totally. He was a legend in his own time. So, yeah, but a lot of times people forget that, like, bands like that you think were huge back then, or, you know, they really didn't find their niche until years later, sometimes 2, sometimes 20.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's sad for a lot of artists who fight so hard and years later they get the credit, but they don't get it when they wanted it, you know?
Yeah, totally. Well, who do you have as far as drummers? Do you have a Holy Trinity, or if the Holy Trinity is too hard to lock down, you can always do a Magnificent Seven?
It's so hard, man, because it's so great. It goes from, you know, this band to that. I mean, you know, I'm not, you know, I've listed those. Obviously, you could say Bonham, Tony Williams, Jack DeJohnette. You could just go on but those records I've almost listened to ad nauseum, you know, and it's like certain records, other records are more fun. I really relish finding new bands, and I don't care about the drummer, you know. Sure. Is the band cool? I'm a huge vinyl collector, nuts. You know, I literally tour with a road case with 100 records. I buy records incessantly, which during the lockdown now has been really rewarding, luckily, because I can take time and listen to all these records I've bought all these years. But I travel with 2 turntables, like high school little record players I bring. Amazing. So if one goes down, I got one for my room, you know. Wow. So I'm really into it. So to me, the fun part is discovering a new band that I never found out or knew about. And it could be something like Humble Pie.
Of course.
Which granted, you know, Humble Pie is Humble Pie. They're huge. But for me, I didn't discover Humble Pie till like maybe 15 years, 20 years ago. Yeah. So that's like my new Led Zeppelin for a long time. And that drummer, you know, is incredible. Jerry Shirley. Is that Jerry Shirley? I think so. And, you know, amazing and just such a cool vibe. Now, he's not John Bonham. He's not Simon Kirke, but he's close, and I'm fucking into it. You know, and like a band like Budgie. I don't know if you've heard of Budgie.
Of course. I love Budgie. Yeah.
Amazing, right? But most people don't know what Budgie is. And on vinyl, it's like trying to find a Budgie record is like a needle in a haystack. I think the last one I bought was in like Glasgow, and it was like 20 pounds, and that's like cheap for a Budgie record. Right. And that drummer is just all over the place, but he's great too. And they sound like the Kinks meet Black Sabbath. Right. If you don't know, you know, it's just like, what the fuck's going on? This is so great. So, so anyway, you know, that's exciting to me. You know, obviously the drummers that we know, but like seeing a local drummer or like, you know, listening to a Black Crowes record and go like Steve Gorman, fucking amazing. It doesn't have to be that trinity of those dudes anymore because I've studied that. Yeah. And of course, that's not going to diminish their importance on me or the world. But what's exciting to me now is these other cats who are just as momentous, you know, and obviously cats like my homies, you know, like Craig McIntyre or Dave Elich or Matt Chamberlain, or, you know, these are my people. These are my friends. I hang out with these dudes and we trade licks or talk about how you do that or what. And these are the dudes who are doing it now, and that's pretty exciting to have these kind of peers who are such bad mofos that I can kind of say that dude's my inspiration. My buddy down the street, Kevin Stevens, is an inspiration, who I went to grad school with. These guys play, and it's just like shit. This is happening now. These guys sound good. Yeah. And it's exciting to watch these dudes kind of take off. And I'm you know, missing a million dudes. There's a great guy named Rick Sheridan who lives in Brooklyn, who played with a band called Earl Greyhound, who I think is playing with one of the Roots now. Is all just nuts. Like this dude is like Billy Cobham meets like Mitch Mitchell.
Yeah,
and
he's
it's
great.
Like, what the fuck? Yeah, Rick. And it's like, what? Like mountains and, you know, volcanoes and shit when he plays. You know, so that is inspiring. You know, obviously everybody knows the main dudes, but like those cats are the dudes that are really inspiring me right now. I think. You know, the dudes were walking among us, you know?
And you know what? You, as well as myself, fellow Cancer drummer, amongst you mentioned Mitch Mitchell, who is also a Cancer, you know, and then there's from Stuart Copeland to Ringo Starr, Ian Pace, Joey Kramer, Jim Gordon, Will Goldsmith, Joe Morello, Fish of Fishbone, Thomas Hakem of Sugar, Philly Joe Jones. There's no shortage of badass Cancer drummers out there. So
that's hilarious. Yeah, that's a good list.
Shout out to my Cancer drummers. Me and Will Goldsmith of Sunny Day Real Estate, he and I have the same birthday on July 4th, so he's a special connection for me as well.
That's super cool. That's crazy.
Well, shit, Jason, it was great talking to you, man. I appreciate the time and all the good stories, and best of luck navigating all this madness, and hopefully I can catch up with you in person again at some point, and we can have ourselves a cold beverage.
I would love that, and great to meet you, and thanks for DJing, rocking us that night so many years ago in that crazy bar in New York. And remember, hire is Big H, the lemon chicken sandwich when you get to Salt Lake City, dude, to die for, and a good root beer too.
Nice.
Killer.
Awesome. Right on, Jason. Great talking to you, buddy.
You too.
All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and definitely thanks to Jason for rapping and Craig McIntyre for hooking it up. Had great conversation with both of those dudes, and I certainly hope y'all enjoyed them. We'll be catching up soon. Crash, bang, boom.